My name is Evelyn Hayes. I am 34 years old, and exactly 5 days before Christmas, my own flesh and blood cleaned out my entire life savings. I was standing in the middle of the most exclusive holiday gala in Chicago, surrounded by millionaires, when I found out my older brother had vanished with $1.2 million, including the untouchable trust fund my late husband left for our 10-year-old daughter. He left me penniless, humiliated, and holding a mocking Christmas card. But what my arrogant brother didn't realize as he boarded his first-class flight was that my little girl was already 10 steps ahead of him. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled. And please, stay with me until the end. December 20th, 2025. The air inside the grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel smelled of fresh pine needles, roasted chestnuts, and money. Old, heavy money. It was the annual Chicago Mayor's Winter Charity Gala, and my event planning firm, Hayes Elegance, was running the show. For the past 4 years, since my husband David passed away, I had poured every ounce of my blood, sweat, and tears into building this company from the ground up. I was a 34-year-old widow raising a brilliant, quiet 10-year-old girl named Chloe, and failure simply wasn't an option. I stood near the towering 20-foot Christmas tree in the center of the room, smoothing down the skirt of my black tailored dress. I checked my earpiece, listening to the chatter of my staff. Everything had to be flawless. My fee for tonight was supposed to be the safety net that would get Chloe and me through the slow winter months. It was the kind of night that cemented your reputation in this city. If you pulled this off, you were golden. If you messed up, you were dead in the water. "Evelyn!" a voice crackled in my earpiece. It was Sarah, my lead coordinator. Thomas is at the loading dock with the vintage Bordeaux. He won't let the catering staff uncrate the bottles until the final invoice is settled. He's being a real pain about it. I sighed, pressing 2 fingers to my temple to ward off a looming headache. I'm on it. Tell him I'll be right there. Thomas was a high-end wine distributor I'd worked with for years. He was a stickler for the rules, strictly cash on delivery for the rare stuff, and tonight's order was no joke. $45,000 worth of imported French wine. I wove through the crowd of men in tuxedos and women in sparkling gowns, forcing a serene, professional smile onto my face. In this business, you are a swan, gliding effortlessly on the surface while paddling like hell underneath. I pushed through the heavy velvet curtains leading to the service corridor. The stark fluorescent lights were a harsh contrast to the warm glow of the ballroom. Thomas was standing next to 4 wooden crates, his arms crossed over his chest, tapping his foot. "Evening, Thomas," I said, keeping my tone light and breezy. "I hear you're holding my wine hostage." He gave a tight, apologetic smile. "You know how it is, Evelyn. My boss is cracking down on accounts receivable before the end of the year. No payment, no pour, nothing personal." "I totally get it," I said, unzipping my sleek leather portfolio. I pulled out my heavy titanium American Express black card. It was my pride and joy, a tangible piece of metal that proved I had made it. I had survived the worst thing life could throw at a woman, losing her husband at 30, and I had built an empire. I handed him the card. "Run it. Let's get these corks popped. The mayor is scheduled for a toast in 20 minutes. Thomas pulled a portable wireless terminal from his jacket pocket. He inserted the chip. A small digital beep echoed in the quiet hallway. We waited for the receipt to print. Instead, the machine let out a harsh, flat buzz. Thomas frowned, pulling the card out and wiping the chip on his sleeve. "Must be a bad connection. Let me try tapping it." He tapped the card against the screen. Buzz. The screen flashed red. I could clearly read the bold letters from where I stood. Declined. Code 51, insufficient funds. A cold prickle of annoyance crawled up the back of my neck. "That's ridiculous," I laughed, though the sound was a bit too hollow. "I have a $500,000 credit limit on that account, and it's tied directly to my primary business checking. Run it manually. It has to be a bank error." Thomas sighed, punching the numbers in by hand. The catering staff around us had stopped moving, sensing the tension. They were trying not to stare, but I could feel their eyes on me. He hit enter. The machine churned for a second before letting out that same sickening buzz. Declined. Contact card issuer. Thomas looked up at me, his expression shifting from professional courtesy to uncomfortable pity. "It's dead, Evelyn. It's completely maxed out. I can't release the wine. If you don't have another way to pay, I have to load these crates back onto the truck." Thomas, wait, please, this is insane. I literally just deposited a $50,000 retainer 3 days ago. Let me just check my app. The system is probably just freaking out because of holiday volume. My hands were shaking as I pulled my phone from my pocket. My thumb slipped twice before the Face ID finally registered. I tapped the blue icon for my banking app. The loading wheel spun. It felt like it was spinning for an eternity. Come on, come on, come on, I prayed silently. When the dashboard finally populated, the breath was knocked entirely out of my lungs. The hallway spun, the fluorescent lights suddenly too bright, the air too thin. I blinked hard, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me in the dim light. Operating account. $0 payroll account. $0. A sound escaped my throat, something between a gasp and a whimper. My fingers, trembling violently now, tapped on the linked accounts tab. I scrolled down past the business accounts to my personal savings. Personal savings. $0 no. No, this couldn't be real. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I scrolled frantically to the very bottom, to the one account that was supposed to be completely untouchable. The trust fund David had set up for Chloe before his heart gave out. The money from his life insurance. It was her college tuition. It was her future. Chloe Hayes Revocable Trust. $0. Evelyn. Thomas's voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. Hey, are you okay? You look like you're going to pass out. I couldn't speak. I clicked on the transaction history. There was only one entry for the entire day, time-stamped at 4:15 p.m., just a few hours ago. Outgoing wire transfer. $1,240,000. Destination. Cayman Islands Offshore Holdings. Authorized by Arthur Vance, VP of Operations. Arthur. My brother. The name hit me with the force of a freight train. Arthur, my 36-year-old brother who had spent his entire adult life bouncing from one failed startup to another. Arthur, the golden child who could do no wrong in our mother's eyes. Arthur, whom I had given a BS, symbolic title of VP of Operations, and a generous salary just to get my mother off my back. He just needs some stability, Evie, my mother, Dorothy, had pleaded 6 months ago. You're doing so well, just put him on the payroll, give him a title so he feels respected, cut the boy some slack, he's had a hard run. Family helps family. I had given him a title. I had given him access to the payroll system to approve timesheets. I had given him the benefit of the doubt, and he had used it to gut me like a fish. I have to go, I choked out, shoving my phone into my pocket. Evelyn, what about the wine? Thomas called out. Take it back, I yelled over my shoulder, already sprinting down the service hallway. Just take it back, Thomas. I'm sorry. I burst out the back doors of the hotel into the freezing Chicago night. I didn't have my heavy winter coat, just my thin dress, but I didn't feel the biting wind. My entire body was numb with shock and a rising volcanic rage. I threw myself into my SUV, slamming the door shut. I hit the push-to-start button and jammed the car into drive. My tires screeched on the icy pavement of the parking garage. I grabbed my phone and dialed his number. It went straight to voicemail. Hey, it's Arthur. I'm probably out crushing a deal. Leave a message. Pick up the phone, I screamed into the empty car, tears of pure fury blurring my vision. Pick up the damn phone, Arthur. I dialed again. Voicemail. I merged onto Lakeshore Drive, pushing well past the speed limit, weaving erratically through the holiday traffic. My mind was racing, trying to put the pieces together. The wire transfer required two-factor authentication. It required the physical security key, a little USB device called a YubiKey that my bank had issued for large wire transfers. I kept it locked in a biometric mini-safe in my home office. Arthur couldn't have authorized that transfer from a coffee shop. He had to have been in my house. Yesterday. The memory slammed into me. Arthur had stopped by the house yesterday afternoon while I was on a Zoom call in the kitchen. He said he was just dropping off an early Christmas present for Chloe. His obnoxious 29-year-old girlfriend, Jess, had been with him. Jess with her lip fillers, designer knockoff bags, and a personality that screamed gold digger. I had heard Arthur go upstairs to use the bathroom, but I had been too distracted by my meeting to realize he was up there for a long time. It took me 35 agonizing minutes to reach my house in the quiet suburbs of Oak Park. The street was lined with houses wrapped in twinkling Christmas lights, a picturesque scene of suburban peace that made me sick to my stomach. I pulled into the driveway, threw the car in park, and ran up the front steps. I fumbled with my keys, dropping them twice on the frozen porch before finally unlocking the heavy oak door. "Chloe!" I called out, my voice shrill and panicked. "I'm in the living room, Mom," her sweet, calm voice answered. I let out a ragged breath of relief, knowing she was safe, but I didn't stop. I bypassed the living room and ran straight down the hall to my home office. I threw the door open and flipped on the light switch. Everything looked perfectly normal. My desk was neat, my dual monitors were asleep. But when I looked to the left, behind the large, abstract painting that I kept slightly ajar, my worst nightmare was confirmed. The heavy steel door of the wall safe was wide open. I stumbled over to it, my knees threatening to buckle. The safe didn't look forced. There were no scratch marks. He hadn't pried it open. He had used the physical backup key I kept hidden in the false bottom of a fake potted plant on the bookshelf. He knew about it. He had watched me. I looked inside the dark metal box. My passport was still there. Some emergency cash was still there. But the black UB key, the digital key to my entire life's work, was gone. In its place sat a bright, festive envelope. It was red with little green holly berries stamped on it. My name was written on the front in Arthur's messy scrawl. My hands shook so violently that I tore the envelope in half trying to open it. I pulled out a premium Hallmark Christmas card featuring a picture of a smiling cartoon reindeer. I opened it, and the words written inside in thick black Sharpie burned themselves into my retinas forever. "Merry early Christmas, Evie. Look, don't freak out. Consider this my severance package and my startup capital. For 34 years, you've played the perfect responsible daughter while I got treated like the family disappointment. You've got the fancy business and the big house. You're fronting like you have it all together, but you hoard your wealth while I've been struggling just to breathe. Well, it's my turn now. Jess and I are heading somewhere warm where there are no extradition treaties, so don't waste your time calling the cops. I'm finally going to build the empire I deserve. You're young, you're a hustler, you'll bounce back. You always do. Love, Arthur." I read it twice, then a third time. The words started to blur together as the air in the room grew suffocatingly thin. Severance package. He justified stealing over $1 million, stealing his own niece's college fund, as some kind of twisted back pay for his own insecurities. He didn't just rob me, he blamed me for it. He felt entitled to it. A primal, agonizing scream ripped through my throat. It was a raw, animalistic sound of pure betrayal that echoed off the walls of the quiet house. I crumpled the festive card into a tight ball and threw it across the room. I grabbed the heavy glass paperweight off my desk and hurled it at the wall. It shattered into 100 glittering pieces, raining down on the hardwood floor like ice. I sank to my knees, burying my face in my hands. The cold reality was sinking in. I was 34. I had a daughter. I had a payroll to meet on Friday. I had a mortgage. And I had exactly $0 to my name. My brother had executed me flawlessly, and he was probably drinking champagne at 30,000 feet while I sat on the floor of my office bleeding out. I thought the betrayal couldn't possibly cut any deeper. I thought this was rock bottom. But as I would find out the very next morning, Arthur didn't act alone. The knife in my back hadn't just been twisted by my brother. It had been handed to him by the woman who gave birth to us both. The morning of December 21st, 2025, broke with a bitter, biting chill that seeped straight through my bones. I hadn't slept a wink. I had spent the entire night sitting on the floor of my home office, staring at the empty wall safe, wrapping my arms around my knees just to keep from physically falling apart. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the zeros on my banking app. Every time the furnace kicked on, I wondered how many more days I had until the utility company shut it off. At 7 a.m., I dragged myself off the floor, splashed freezing water on my face, and drove straight to the Chicago Police Department precinct. I didn't bother changing out of the clothes I had worn to the gala. My black dress was wrinkled, my makeup smeared, but I didn't care. I marched into the sterile, fluorescent-lit lobby, clutching a manila folder stuffed with freshly printed bank statements, the corporate structure documents of Hayes Elegance, and that mocking Holly Berry Christmas card. I was seated across the metal desk of a tired-looking investigator named Detective Carter. He smelled of stale coffee and cheap aftershave. I poured the documents onto his desk, my hands trembling as I pointed to the wire transfer. "He stole $1.2 million, I said, my voice cracking with suppressed rage. "He used a stolen physical security key to wire it to an offshore shell corporation. He left a note admitting he took it. He's on a flight out of the country right now. You have to freeze his passport. You have to alert Interpol." Detective Carter didn't match my urgency. He picked up the corporate resolution document, adjusting his reading glasses. He traced his thick finger down the page, stopping at the second paragraph. He let out a long, heavy sigh that made my stomach drop. "Mrs. Hayes," he started, his tone patronizingly gentle. "Look at this line right here. Arthur Vance. You have him listed as the Vice President of Operations. And this bank mandate, it shows he's an authorized signatory on the primary business accounts." "A symbolic signatory," I argued, leaning across the desk. "My mother begged me to put him on the paperwork so he could have a respectable title on his resume. I never gave him permission to authorize wires, and I certainly didn't give him permission to drain my 10-year-old daughter's trust fund. That's grand larceny." Carter rubbed his temples. "I understand you're upset, but the law doesn't care about family favors. You gave him the keys to the vault. He didn't break a window. He walked through a front door you opened for him. Technically, legally speaking, this is a breach of fiduciary duty. It's a business dispute between corporate officers." The air left the room. "A business dispute?" I whispered. "He robbed a widow and a child." "It's a civil matter," Carter said flatly, pushing the file back toward me. "I can't issue an international red notice or drag the FBI into a civil lawsuit between a sister and her VP. You don't need a detective, Evelyn. You need a ruthless litigation attorney. I'm sorry, but my hands are tied." Civil matter. Those two words echoed in my head like a death sentence. That meant years of lawsuits. By the time a judge finally banged a gavel, Arthur and Jess would have burned through every single dime of my husband's life insurance on 5-star resorts and designer clothes. I walked out of the precinct into the blinding white snow reflecting off the pavement. The law had just washed its hands of me. I had built a fortress around my business to protect it from strangers, but I had lowered the drawbridge for the Trojan horse because we shared the same DNA. I climbed into my freezing SUV, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. There was only one person left who could fix this. Only one person who had any sway over Arthur. My mother. Dorothy Vance lived in a pristine, affluent suburb of Evanston. Her house was a monument to appearances, perfectly manicured, excessively decorated, and devoid of any real warmth. I drove through the blinding Chicago snowstorm, the windshield wipers struggling to keep up. I was practically hyperventilating, rehearsing what I was going to say. I just needed her to call him. If Dorothy screamed at him, if she threatened to disown him, Arthur would crack. He was a coward at heart. He always folded when our mother got angry. I pulled into her driveway, threw the car in park, and ran up the shoveled walkway. I didn't bother knocking. I burst through the front door, bringing a gust of freezing wind and snow into the immaculate foyer. The house smelled of cinnamon, expensive pine candles, and suffocating perfection. Classical holiday music played softly from the surround sound system. "Mom!" I screamed, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Mom, where are you?" I found her in the living room. Dorothy was sitting in her plush wingback chair next to a 12-foot professionally decorated Christmas tree. She was wearing a tailored cashmere sweater, calmly sipping Earl Grey tea from a fine china cup. She didn't jump when I barged in. She didn't even drop her teacup. She just slowly turned her head, looking me up and down with an expression of mild distaste. "Evelyn, really? Look at your shoes. You're tracking slush all over the Persian rug." "Mom, you need to call Arthur right now," I gasped, ignoring her entirely. I fell to my knees on the edge of the rug, completely broken. He emptied my bank accounts, all of it. The business, my savings. He even took Chloe's trust fund. He stole $1.2 million and ran away with Jess. You have to call him and make him wire it back before it's too late. I waited for the shock. I waited for her to drop the cup, to cover her mouth in horror, to weep for the destruction of her granddaughter's future. Instead, Dorothy carefully set her teacup down on the glass coffee table on top of a velvet coaster. She smoothed a microscopic wrinkle out of her slacks. "Oh, stop shrieking, Evie," she said, her voice as casual as if I had just complained about the traffic on I-94. "You're giving me a migraine. Arthur called me yesterday. He said he finally found a prime real estate investment in the Emirates that suits his talents. He just needed a little startup capital to get his foot in the door." I froze. The blood drained from my face so fast I felt dizzy. "Startup capital?" I choked out. "Mom, he stole every penny I have. That's not capital. That's a felony." Dorothy finally looked me dead in the eye. Her gaze was ice cold, entirely devoid of maternal empathy. "You always have to make everything about you, don't you? You've been flaunting your success in his face for years. The big house, the fancy charity galas, the private school for Chloe. Your brother has been struggling to find his path. He has family. So, he borrowed some money to get on his feet. Why do you have to be so horribly selfish? Selfish? The word hit me like a physical slap across the face. I stared at the woman who gave birth to me, trying to comprehend the sheer lunacy of what she had just said. He stole the money David left for Chloe, I whispered, the realization crashing down on me like an avalanche. And you knew he was going to do it. Dorothy picked up a silver nail file from the end table and began inspecting her manicure. I didn't know the exact amount, but Arthur came to me crying last week. He said you were suffocating him at work, treating him like a lowly employee instead of an equal. I simply told him he needed to take charge of his own destiny. I gave him the push he needed. She paused, blowing a fleck of dust off her fingernail. You have so much, Evelyn. You hoard your wealth while he scrapes by. He has big ideas. He's going to build an empire over there. And when he does, he won't be the failure of the family anymore. You should be proud to help him. Consider it paying me back for raising you. The room started to spin. She didn't see a crime. She saw a scholarship program for her favorite child. She viewed my hard-earned savings, my late husband's lifeblood, as a community pot that she was entitled to redistribute to the son who had never worked a hard day in his life. In her twisted, narcissistic mind, authorizing the financial execution of her daughter and granddaughter was an act of love for her son. You're sick, I breathed, backing away from her slowly as if she were a venomous snake. You are actually truly sick in the head. Dorothy's eyes flashed with anger. Don't you dare speak to me that way. If you're going to throw a tantrum, you can leave, and don't bother coming to Sunday dinner until you're ready to apologize for your attitude. Arthur is going to be a massive success, and when he returns, you're going to feel very foolish for making such a fuss over a little money. I looked at my mother sitting by her glittering Christmas tree, surrounded by luxury, demanding I apologize for being robbed. The betrayal was so absolute, so profound, that it instantly burned away my sadness. The grief vaporized, leaving behind a cold, hard, terrifying resolve. I was 34 years old, and I realized in that exact second that I was an orphan. My parents were either dead or dead to me. I had no safety net. I had no family to fall back on. It was just me and my 10-year-old daughter against the world. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I stood up straight, my spine turning to steel. Enjoy your holiday, Dorothy, I said, my voice dropping to a dead, hollow whisper, because it's the last time you will ever see my face. I turned on my heel and walked out the front door, letting it slam shut behind me. The freezing air hit my face, but I welcomed it. It woke me up. I climbed back into my SUV and gripped the steering wheel. I had hit rock bottom, and the only way left to go was up. I had to go home, figure out how to sell my car, pawn my wedding ring, and tell my daughter that her father's money was gone. I drove back to Oak Park in a trance. When I pulled into my driveway, the sun was beginning to set, casting long, gray shadows over the snow. The motion sensor lights on the garage didn't flick on. The smart keypad on the front door was dead. My stomach twisted. The utility bills were on auto pay from the business account. The bank had already frozen the overdrafts, triggering an immediate shutoff. I used the physical spare key to let myself in. The house was pitch black and freezing. The thermostat on the wall was blank. I fumbled my way into the kitchen, my boots echoing loudly on the hardwood, and found a box of emergency candles. I lit one, the small orange flame casting dancing shadows against the granite countertops of the home I had worked so hard to keep. I set the candle on the dining room table, opened my laptop, which only had 15% battery left, and pulled up a blank document. Petition for Chapter 11, Bankruptcy. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I felt like a failure. I had failed as a businesswoman, but more importantly, I had failed as a mother. I had let a wolf into the sheepfold because he shared my last name, and my daughter was going to pay the price. Tears finally spilled over my eyelashes, dripping onto the keys. Mom? The soft voice cut through the heavy silence of the dark house. I quickly wiped my face, slamming the laptop shut so she wouldn't see the screen. I turned around to see Chloe standing at the bottom of the stairs. She was wearing her oversized pink fleece pajamas, clutching the worn-out stuffed bear David had given her when she was a toddler. In the flickering candlelight, she looked so small, so innocent. I forced a cracked smile. Hey, sweetie, the power is just out. Probably a downed line from the snow. Why aren't you upstairs playing? Chloe didn't look scared of the dark. She walked slowly across the living room, her socks sliding silently on the wood, and stopped right in front of the table. She looked at the candle, then at my red, swollen eyes, and finally at the closed laptop. Her gaze was unnervingly steady. She had David's eyes, sharp, analytical, missing absolutely nothing. "You're crying because Uncle Arthur took the money from the computer, right?" she asked, her voice clinically detached. My heart completely stopped. I hadn't said a word to her about the accounts. I hadn't told anyone except the police and my mother. I nodded slowly, unable to lie to her. "Yes, baby, Uncle Arthur did something very, very bad. And the money Daddy left for you, it's gone." Chloe tilted her head, hugging her bear a little tighter. She shrugged as if I had just told her we were out of peanut butter. "He didn't take the money, Mom," she said calmly. I stared at her, thinking the stress was making me hallucinate. "Chloe, honey, I know you want to make me feel better, but this isn't a game. It's real life." Chloe took a step closer to the candlelight. Her expression hardened into a look of fierce, terrifying intelligence. "I'm not playing pretend," my 10-year-old daughter said firmly. "I knew he was going to try to steal it. So, yesterday, when he went into your office, I pressed Dad's panic button. The money is still exactly where it belongs." "I'm not playing pretend," my 10-year-old daughter said firmly. "I knew he was going to try to steal it. So yesterday, when he went into your office, I pressed Dad's panic button. The money is still exactly where it belongs." I stared at her in the dim, flickering candlelight. The freezing air inside the dark house suddenly felt electrified. My exhausted brain struggled to process the words coming out of my fifth grader's mouth. I thought the stress of bankruptcy was causing me to hallucinate. "Chloe, sweetie, what are you talking about?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "What panic button? Uncle Arthur took the security key from the safe. I saw the transfer receipt on my phone. The balance is 0. Chloe didn't argue. She simply walked around the dining room table, pulling her iPad out from under her arm. She set it down on the dark mahogany wood right next to the emergency candle. She tapped the screen, and the sudden, cool blue glow illuminated her face. In that lighting, she looked exactly like David. She had his intense, analytical stare, the look he always got when he was writing code or hunting down a vulnerability in a network. David had been a senior cybersecurity architect before his heart failure. He was brilliant, paranoid, and fiercely protective of his family. And as it turned out, he had left behind a ghost in our machine. "Dad didn't trust Uncle Arthur," Chloe said, her voice dropping to a serious, hushed tone. "Remember when Uncle Arthur asked to borrow $10,000 3 years ago and Dad said no? Dad told me Arthur was a black hat waiting to happen, a threat from the inside. So Dad built a failsafe for us." She swiped her small finger across the iPad screen, opening a hidden, encrypted folder. "Yesterday afternoon, when Uncle Arthur and his girlfriend Jess came over," Chloe explained, her eyes never leaving the screen. "Jess kept you busy in the kitchen talking about her stupid fake designer bags. Uncle Arthur said he had to use the bathroom upstairs, but I was sitting in the hallway reading my book. I saw him go into your office, Mom. I saw him open the painting and punch the code into the mini safe." My blood ran cold. "You saw him? Chloe, why didn't you scream? Why didn't you run and tell me? Because if I told you, you would have just yelled at him, kicked him out, and he would have tried it again later when we weren't looking," she said, with the terrifying cold logic of an adult. "Dad taught me that if you catch a hacker in your system, you don't unplug the computer. You trap them in a honeypot. A honeypot." I knew the term from David's late-night rants about corporate security. It was a decoy system. A fake target designed to look incredibly valuable, meant to lure a cybercriminal in so you could monitor them without risking your actual data. "Uncle Arthur took the black YubiKey out of the safe," Chloe continued. "He put it in the pocket of his leather coat, left the coat on the hallway chair, and actually went to the bathroom. He was in there for 5 minutes. That was my window." She looked up at me, a tiny proud smile playing on her lips. Dad kept a whole box of broken, dummy USB keys in his old desk drawer. I grabbed one that looked exactly like yours. I sneaked over to Uncle Arthur's coat, pulled your real key out of his pocket, and dropped the dummy key in." I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. My 10-year-old daughter had pickpocketed a grown man and sabotaged a $1 million heist while I was pouring wine in the kitchen. "But Chloe," I stammered, my mind racing. "The bank app, I saw the numbers. My accounts are at 0. He authorized a wire transfer to the Cayman Islands. How is that possible if he had a fake key?" Chloe tapped the iPad screen again. A complex dashboard popped up, filled with green text and loading bars. That's where the panic button comes in, she said. As soon as Uncle Arthur left the house with the fake key, I went to my room and opened this app Dad built. It's a localized emergency protocol. When I pressed execute, the program immediately contacted the bank's backend servers using Dad's master credentials. She pointed a small finger at a line of code. In less than 2 seconds, the system swept every single penny from your checking, payroll, and savings accounts. It moved all $1.2 million into the ultra-secure, irrevocable trust account Dad set up in Delaware. It's locked behind a 3-tier authorization. To move even $1 out of that trust, the bank requires your physical signature, my thumbprint, and our lawyer's notarized approval. I stared at the screen, the magnitude of what she was saying washing over me. So, the money is safe? It's really safe? It's completely untouchable, Chloe nodded. The reason your banking app says 0 is because the money actually did move out of those accounts, but it didn't go to Dubai or the Cayman Islands. It went into the vault. Tears, hot and fast, started streaming down my cheeks, but this time they were tears of pure, unadulterated relief. I reached across the table, grabbing Chloe's small hand and pressing it to my forehead. I was shaking. The crushing, suffocating weight that had been sitting on my chest since the gala began to crack and fall away. David had protected us from the grave, and my brilliant, brave little girl had executed his plan flawlessly. But wait, I said, wiping my eyes and trying to catch my breath. Arthur thinks he has the money. He left me a note. He boarded a flight to the Emirates. How did he authorize a wire transfer? Chloe smirked. It was a dark, mischievous look. The honey pot, she said. After the panic button moved our real money to the vault, it left behind a mirrored, fake version of the banking portal on your main IP address. When Arthur went home and plugged that dummy USB key into his laptop, he didn't log into the real bank. He logged into a simulation Dad designed. She brought up a video file on the iPad. It was a screen recording of the fake banking portal. Arthur typed in his stolen password. The simulation let him in. He saw a fake dashboard that said $1.2 million. He typed in the routing numbers for his offshore shell company, hit transfer, and the simulation threw some digital confetti and printed a fake receipt that said, "Transaction successful." It even sent a spoof text message to your phone to make it look real. I burst out laughing. It was a ragged, hysterical sound that echoed in the dark, freezing kitchen. Arthur had stolen nothing. He had stolen a digital illusion. He had hacked a video game. He had taken his obnoxious girlfriend, boarded a first-class international flight, and was currently landing in Dubai, fully believing he was a millionaire. He thinks he won, I whispered, the realization hitting me like a shot of adrenaline. He thinks he's a king, Chloe agreed. But, Chloe, I paused, my mind calculating the logistics. If the accounts are at 0, how did he buy the first-class tickets? How is he paying for his hotel right now? He has the silver corporate card, right? Chloe asked. Yes, I nodded, the secondary Amex. But I put a hard limit of $5,000 on that card last year because he kept buying expensive lunches. Exactly, Chloe said. The bank's automated overdraft protection probably let the flight tickets slide because of your company's good credit history. But right now, Uncle Arthur is walking around Dubai with a card that is maxed out. He thinks he has $1 million in liquid cash backing him up. But the second he tries to make a massive purchase, the bank will hard decline it. I finished her sentence, the beautiful, terrifying reality of the trap coming into full focus. The algorithm will flag it as international fraud because the primary accounts are empty. They'll lock the card completely. I stood up from the dining room table, the cold air no longer bothering me. The victim mentality that my mother had tried to force down my throat evaporated. I wasn't a helpless widow. I wasn't a stepping stone for my brother's delusions of grandeur. I was the CEO of my life, and my brother had just walked blindly into a financial minefield. In Dubai, bouncing a check or attempting to defraud a hospitality establishment wasn't just an embarrassing civil matter. It was a severe criminal offense. They didn't have a slap on the wrist policy for broke tourists trying to live like royalty. They had concrete cells. We don't have to do anything, do we? I asked, looking down at my daughter in the candlelight. Chloe shook her head slowly. No, Mom. We just sit in the dark and wait for him to get hungry. He's going to try to spend the fortune he thinks he stole, and when he does, he's going to trigger the alarm himself. I walked around the table and pulled Chloe into a tight, fierce hug. I buried my face in her hair, inhaling the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Your dad would be so incredibly proud of you," I whispered. "You saved us, Chloe. You saved everything." She hugged me back, wrapping her small arms around my neck. "We're a team, Mom. Always." That night, we didn't sleep in the freezing bedrooms upstairs. I brought down all the heavy down comforters and pillows, and we built a fortress on the living room rug. We huddled together for warmth, eating cold peanut butter sandwiches by candlelight. We were technically broke in the eyes of the power company, but I had never felt richer in my entire life. The trap was set. The bait had been taken. Now it was just a matter of time before Arthur's arrogance forced the jaws of the trap to snap shut. The wait wouldn't be long. In fact, it would happen on the biggest, most expensive night of the year. New Year's Eve was only 10 days away, and Arthur, sitting in a luxury suite halfway across the world, was about to find out exactly what happens when you try to steal from a ghost. The hardest part of setting a trap isn't building it. It's having the discipline to sit in the freezing dark and wait for the animal to step on the trigger. For the next week, from December 22nd to the morning of New Year's Eve, Chicago was locked in a bitter, relentless deep freeze, and so was my life. Because the bank had flagged my main accounts as completely drained, thanks to Chloe's localized emergency protocol shoving everything into the ironclad trust, my automated bills bounced. The power company cut the electricity. The gas company shut off the heat. I couldn't just march into the bank and explain the situation to a teller. If I unlocked the trust to pay my electric bill, it would generate a paper trail, alert the fraud department, and potentially tip Arthur off before he hung himself. I had to play the part of the ruined, bankrupt sister perfectly. If I didn't look like I was bleeding out, the shark wouldn't attack. So, Chloe and I camped in our own living room. I drove to a sketchy pawn shop on the edge of the city, walking in with my head held high, and sold a pair of diamond earrings David had given me for our first anniversary. The greasy man behind the bulletproof glass offered me $1,200 for a pair worth 10 times that. I took the crumpled $100 bills without arguing, went to a hardware store, and bought a portable indoor propane heater, heavy wool blankets, and groceries. But the physical cold was nothing compared to the professional hemorrhage I was enduring. In the high-stakes, gossip-fueled world of Chicago luxury event planning, blood in the water attracts every bottom feeder in the city. By Christmas Eve, the rumors were spreading like wildfire. Vendors talk. Thomas, the wine distributor, had undoubtedly told his boss about my black card declining, and that boss had told others. My phone, constantly charging in my freezing SUV out in the driveway, buzzed nonstop with texts from panicked clients and fake sympathetic rivals. "Evelyn, heard a nasty rumor about Hayes Elegance facing insolvency. Are my deposits safe?" "Evie, honey, just checking in. If you need to offload the spring gala contract because of your financial issues, my firm is happy to take it off your hands." I sat in my car, watching my breath plume in the frigid air, reading the messages that were dismantling my 10-year reputation brick by brick. I wanted to scream. I wanted to type back in all caps that I was a millionaire, that the money was safe, that this was a sting operation. But I couldn't. I had to swallow my pride and type back vague, defeated apologies. I watched my empire seemingly crumble to dust, trusting my daughter's code and my late husband's genius more than my own ego. While I was chopping firewood in my backyard to keep my child warm, Arthur and Jess were living like royalty 10 time zones away. I didn't need the FBI to track them. I just needed Instagram. Jess, being the textbook definition of a narcissistic gold digger, couldn't resist bragging to her 2,000 followers. Sitting by the portable propane heater, Chloe and I would pull up Jess's public stories on the iPad. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. Only the train was plated in 24-karat gold. On Christmas Day, Jess posted a selfie from the first-class cabin of an Emirates A380. She was holding a glass of Dom Perignon, her lips puckered. The caption read, "Jet lag, but make it Gucci, leaving the freezing haters behind. Dubai, we have arrived." She spelled arrived wrong, Chloe noted dryly, taking a bite of her cold turkey sandwich. The next day, the posts escalated. They had checked into the Royal Atlantis, a hotel that practically redefined the word excess. Jess filmed a sprawling room tour of a suite that cost more per night than a used Honda Civic. The camera panned over floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the turquoise waters of the Arabian Gulf, marble bathrooms, and a personal butler unpacking their luggage. Arthur walked into the frame of the video wearing a plush white hotel robe, puffing on a thick Cuban cigar. He looked directly at the camera, a smug, arrogant smirk plastered across his face. He raised a crystal glass of whiskey in a mock toast. "To the good life," Arthur drawled, his voice dripping with condescension. "No bosses, no schedules, just pure liquidity. We earned this." I paused the video, my eyes zeroing in on his left wrist. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. Peeking out from the sleeve of the white bathrobe was a heavy, solid gold Rolex Daytona. It wasn't his. It was David's. It was the watch I had given my husband on the day Chloe was born. I kept it in the wall safe right next to the Yubi key. Arthur hadn't just stolen what he thought was $1 million. He had reached into the safe and stolen the physical memory of the man who had built the very trap he was stepping into. "He took Dad's watch," Chloe whispered, leaning closer to the screen. Her voice didn't crack, but her small jaw clenched tight. "I know, baby," I said, putting my arm around her shoulder. "But he's not going to keep it. I promise you." For the next 4 days, the Dubai delusion grew to epic proportions. Jess posted photos of herself carrying shopping bags from Hermes and Chanel at the Dubai Mall. Arthur posted photos of himself test driving a rented Lamborghini down the Sheikh Zayed Road. They were burning through cash at an astronomical rate. But how? "The corporate Amex," Chloe explained, pulling up a secondary terminal window on her iPad. "When they checked into the Atlantis, the hotel ran his card for incidentals. Because it's a corporate account tied to your business, the authorization went through, but they haven't actually settled the final bill yet. Hotels like that just keep a running tab until checkout." So he's floating on a temporary authorization, I realized. But what about the shopping? The designer bags? "Overdraft," Chloe smirked. "The bank's algorithm is letting the smaller charges slide, putting the card deep into the negative because of your stellar credit history. But it's building up, Mom. The system is getting stressed. It's looking for the $1.2 million Arthur thinks he transferred to his offshore account to back up this spending. But that money doesn't exist on the Swift network. It's a ghost." Arthur was essentially walking on a tightrope made of dental floss over a canyon, convinced he was strolling on a steel bridge. He felt invincible. He thought he was a financial genius who had outsmarted his uptight workaholic sister. And then came December 31st, 2025. New Year's Eve. In Chicago, it was 1 p.m. The sky was the color of bruised iron, and another blizzard was rolling in off Lake Michigan. Chloe and I were sitting on the living room rug, wrapped in thick wool blankets. In Dubai, it was 11 p.m. The biggest, most expensive party night of the year was in full swing, and Arthur Vance was not a man to sit on the sidelines when he believed he was a millionaire. Chloe's iPad, which had been sitting quietly on the coffee table, suddenly let out a sharp, high-pitched ping. Chloe dropped her book and scrambled over to the screen. Her fingers flew across the glass, pulling up the hidden honeypot dashboard. The normally green text was flashing a harsh, urgent yellow. "He's making a move," Chloe said, her eyes locked on the scrolling data. "A big one." "What is it?" I asked, my heart suddenly kicking into overdrive. The waiting was over. The game was finally beginning. "He's trying to authorize a massive point-of-sale transaction," Chloe read, decoding the data streams. "Merchant, the Royal Atlantis 5IP Concierge. Amount, oh my God." "How much, Chloe?" $50,000, she breathed. 50,000 United States dollars in a single swipe. I let out a harsh laugh. "He's trying to book the ultra VIP New Year's Eve package, the private cabana, the premium champagne, the works. He wants to ring in the new year like a king." "The Dubai merchant just sent the authorization request to the real banking network," Chloe said, her finger hovering over the screen. "The bank's fraud algorithm is looking at the request. It's looking at his empty checking account. It's looking at the maxed out corporate limit. It's looking at the IP address halfway across the world." The yellow text on Chloe's screen suddenly turned a deep blood red. "Transaction declined. Code 05. Do not honor. Account frozen." "It's done," Chloe whispered, looking up at me. "The bank just hard declined the card and locked it. They just flagged him for international credit fraud." A profound, heavy silence settled over our freezing living room. The trap had sprung. The jaws had snapped shut. Halfway across the world, Arthur's illusion of wealth had just collided violently with a concrete wall of reality. I stared at my iPhone, which was sitting face down on the rug. "He's going to call," I said, my voice eerily calm. "He's standing in front of a hotel manager in Dubai right now. The machine just beeped red. He's going to panic. He's going to try to run the card again, and when it doesn't work, he's going to call me to fix it. Or worse. Worse? Chloe asked. He's going to call me to gloat before the manager tells him it's declined, I realized. He's so arrogant, Chloe. He wants me to see him at the top of the world. He wants to rub my nose in it right as the clock strikes midnight. As if on cue, the dead silence of the house was shattered by my iPhone vibrating violently against the hardwood floor. It let out a piercing default ringtone that made us both jump. I reached out and flipped the phone over. The caller ID glowed brightly in the dim room. Incoming FaceTime video. Arthur. My thumb hovered over the green accept button. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from pure, unadulterated adrenaline. I looked at my 10-year-old daughter. She gave me a single, firm nod. Let him hang himself, Mom, she said quietly. I swiped the green button, letting the video connect. I messed up my hair a bit, trying to look as destitute and broken as possible. I needed to give him exactly what he wanted to see, just for a few more seconds, to keep him on the line while the Dubai authorities closed in. The screen flickered, struggling to connect the international feed, and then suddenly, the image cleared. The brightness of the Dubai skyline practically blinded me. The video was loud, filled with the thumping bass of club music and the sound of cheering crowds. Arthur was standing on a private, glass-enclosed balcony overlooking the ocean, the iconic shape of the Palm Jumeirah in the background. He was wearing a custom-tailored white linen suit. His hair was slicked back, his face flushed with alcohol and absolute arrogance. In his left hand, he held a crystal flute of amber liquid. And strapped to his wrist, gleaming under the party lights, was my dead husband's gold Rolex. He looked directly into the camera lens, grinning like a predator who had just finished a meal. "Happy New Year, little sister," Arthur yelled over the music, blowing a puff of cigar smoke at the screen. "I hope you're enjoying the snow. I just wanted to call and say, thanks for the severance package." I took a deep breath of freezing Chicago air, looking right into his eyes, ready to drop the bomb that would end his life as he knew it. "Happy New Year, little sister," Arthur yelled over the thumping bass of the Dubai club music, blowing a thick cloud of Cuban cigar smoke directly at his phone's camera lens. "I hope you're enjoying the snow. I just wanted to call and say, thanks for the severance package." I sat on the freezing hardwood floor of my living room in Chicago, shivering under a heavy wool blanket. The only light came from the small propane heater and the eerie glow of Chloe's iPad. I stared at the screen of my phone, forcing my eyes to water, pulling my face into a mask of complete and utter despair. I needed him to stay on the line. I needed to keep him gloating for just a few more minutes while the Dubai authorities closed in on his suite. "Arthur, please," I begged, pitching my voice to sound ragged and hysterical. "You can't do this. The power company shut off the heat. We're freezing. That was Chloe's college fund. It was everything David left us. You have to wire it back. I'll give you a cut. Just please send the rest back." Arthur threw his head back and laughed. The sound was distorted by the international connection, but it still cut through the room like a jagged knife. It was the laugh of a man who truly believed he had beaten the system. "Oh, stop whining, Evie," he sneered, leaning against the glass railing of his balcony. The iconic Burj Al Arab glowed neon green and purple in the background. "You can always make more money. You're the responsible one, remember? You're the worker bee. I'm the talent. I've been suffocating in your shadow for 34 years, letting you and Mom treat me like a charity case. Well, frankly, I deserve this." He took a sip of his amber liquor, the heavy gold of my late husband's Rolex catching the festive strobe lights. The sight of David's watch on that thief's wrist made my stomach violently turn, but I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste copper. I kept quiet. "Consider it back pay," Arthur continued, completely high on his own arrogance. "I'm going to burn through this cash in a month just to watch you suffer. I'm going to eat gold leaf steaks and drive Lamborghinis while you're back in Oak Park clipping coupons." Suddenly, another face shoved its way into the frame, blocking Arthur out. It was Jess. She was wearing oversized designer sunglasses at 11 o'clock at night and a diamond tennis necklace that glittered violently under the balcony lights. She thrust a bright orange handbag so close to the camera I could see the grain of the leather. "Hey, sister-in-law," Jess chirped, her voice dripping with venomous fake sweetness. "Do you like my new bag? It's a Birkin. I picked it up at the Dubai Mall this afternoon. It cost 20 grand. Can you believe it? Your money bought this. It matches my nails perfectly, don't you think?" She pulled the bag back and kissed Arthur hard on the cheek. We're going to have so much fun spending your inheritance, Evie. You should see the VIP cabana we just booked for the midnight countdown. It costs 50 grand and it comes with our own private butler. My hands were shaking so hard I had to set my iPhone down on the coffee table, propping it up against a book so the camera remained steady. The rage rising in my chest was hot and acidic. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell Jess that the orange bag was physical evidence of a federal crime, not a fashion accessory. I wanted to tell Arthur that his private butler was about to be replaced by a prison guard. I looked over at Chloe. She was sitting cross-legged in her pink pajamas, her eyes glued to the back-end data scrolling across her iPad. She held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. The trap was fully armed. The hotel was running the card right now. On the FaceTime screen, Arthur was in the middle of describing the yacht he planned to charter for New Year's Day when a thunderous, authoritative pounding on his hotel room door interrupted his monologue. The sound was so loud and sharp that it caused the crystal flute in his hand to tremble, sending a splash of expensive liquor over the rim. He rolled his eyes at the camera, clearly annoyed that the real world was daring to intrude on his billionaire fantasy. "Hold on," he grumbled, shifting the phone so the camera angle tilted wildly toward the ceiling. "It's probably the concierge with the vintage champagne I ordered for the countdown. These people are obsessed with serving me." He walked off the balcony, crossing the massive marble-floored living room of the Royal Atlantis suite. His white linen suit fluttered behind him. He didn't bother checking the peephole. He simply unlatched the heavy mahogany door and swung it open with the supreme entitlement of a man who believes he owns the building. But it wasn't a waiter with a silver tray standing in the hallway. Through the shaky video feed, I saw 4 men. 2 of them were wearing the immaculate dark green uniforms of the Dubai police force, their hands resting cautiously near their utility belts. The other 2 were large private hotel security guards, flanking a man in a crisp black suit who I assumed was the night manager. The manager did not smile. He did not bow. He stepped into the room, forcing Arthur to take a confused step backward. "Mr. Vance," the manager said. His voice was thickly accented, cutting through the heavy thumping of the distant club music with icy precision. "We have a severe problem with your payment method." Arthur let out a harsh, barking laugh of disbelief. He looked at his phone camera, then back at the manager as if sharing a joke with an audience. "A problem? Are you kidding me?" Arthur scoffed. "Look, buddy, I'm trying to ring in the new year. I authorized the 50 grand charge for the VIP cabana an hour ago. Just run the silver card I gave the front desk. I have over $1 million backing that account. My sister right here can verify it. Tell him, Evie, tell him I'm good for it." He turned the screen toward the manager, but the man completely ignored the phone. "Sir," the manager said, his tone dropping an octave, losing any trace of hospitality. "The card issuer has not only declined the $50,000 transaction, but they have initiated a hard lock on the account. Your bank has flagged this card for international corporate fraud." Arthur froze. The smirk melted off his face, replaced by a deep, ugly scowl. "Declined? That's impossible. Your machine is broken. Run it again." "We did run it again, Mr. Vance, 3 times, the manager said flatly. It returned a code 05, do not honor. Furthermore, the bank's automated fraud department contacted our financial desk directly. They informed us that the primary corporate accounts associated with this card possess a balance of exactly $0. You have been floating on temporary overdraft since you arrived." "0?" Arthur spat, his face turning a blotchy shade of red. He stepped aggressively toward the manager. "You're out of your mind. I have $1.2 million in my offshore account. I transferred it myself. I can show you the app right now." Arthur fumbled with his phone, minimizing our FaceTime call into a small picture-in-picture window so he could open his web browser. He was frantically trying to pull up the banking portal. "Look!" Arthur yelled, shoving the phone screen into the manager's face. "Look at the numbers, you idiot! It says $1,240,000 right there!" Beside me in the freezing Chicago living room, Chloe let out a soft, dark chuckle. She reached over and tapped my shoulder. It was time. I stopped faking my tears. I sat up perfectly straight, letting the heavy wool blanket fall from my shoulders. The desperate, broken widow vanished, replaced by the CEO who had built an empire from scratch. I tapped the microphone icon on my screen to make sure I was off mute. "He's not looking at a bank, Arthur," I said. My voice was no longer trembling. It was dead calm, and it echoed loudly out of Arthur's phone speaker, freezing the entire room in Dubai. Arthur slowly lowered the phone, staring at my face on the screen. The confusion in his eyes was palpable. "Evie, what did you just say?" Chloe leaned into the frame, her face completely illuminated by the iPad's glow. She adjusted her glasses, looking directly into the camera lens with the clinical detachment of a surgeon about to make an incision. "Mom said you're not looking at a bank, Uncle Arthur," my 10-year-old daughter stated clearly. "You're looking at a static HTML page I designed. It's a local simulation." The room in Dubai went dead silent. Even the police officers seemed to pause, sensing the massive shift in power. Arthur stared at the little girl on his screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish suffocating on a dock. A simulation?" he whispered. "I call it the Greedy Uncle Edition," Chloe said, her voice dripping with terrifying innocence. "When you broke into Mom's safe and stole that black YubiKey, you grabbed a broken dummy drive my dad kept in his junk drawer. I swapped it while you were in the bathroom." Arthur's face turned a sickening shade of gray. He looked at the heavy gold Rolex on his wrist, then back at the screen. No, I logged in. I saw the dashboard. I made the wire transfer. I saw the receipt." Chloe swiped her iPad, holding the screen up to my iPhone camera so Arthur could see the back-end architecture of the trap he had fallen into. "You saw a front-end UI, Uncle Arthur," Chloe corrected him, using the technical jargon David had taught her. "When you entered your password on my network, you weren't logging into the bank's secure server. You were logging into a local honeypot I hosted on the guest Wi-Fi. I mirrored the CSS to make it look exactly like the real thing. I even added the little security padlock icon because I know you look for that." She pointed to the transaction log on her screen. "When you clicked transfer, you were just moving pixels around on a monitor. You were playing a video game. The numbers went down in your fake browser, but they never moved in the real world. The Swift network never heard of you. You've been flying around the world on a silver credit card that Mom capped at $5,000. The realization hit Arthur with the kinetic force of a speeding truck. His knees physically buckled. He stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the marble foyer table. "Where is the money?" Arthur gasped, the panic finally clawing its way up his throat. "Where is the $1.2 million? "The moment your keystrokes matched the fraud pattern I coded," Chloe explained calmly, "the system executed Dad's panic button protocol. It automatically swept all the company accounts and wired the entire balance into an irrevocable, triple-secured trust account in Delaware. You never even touched the money, Uncle Arthur. You just touched the trigger that locked it away to keep it safe from you." Arthur stared at us, his eyes wide with a primal, absolute terror. The confident, cigar-smoking playboy was dead. He was standing in one of the most expensive cities in the world, and he wasn't just broke. He was destitute. He had flown first class on a card that was now dead. He had booked a $50,000 cabana he couldn't pay for, and worst of all, he had done it all while bragging and screaming at the very people who were now standing in his doorway to arrest him. "You're lying!" Arthur screamed, spitting at the phone screen. "You're a 10-year-old kid. You don't know how to do that." "I am 10 years old," Chloe smirked, "but I'm also David Hayes' daughter, and unlike you, I actually pay attention." The hotel manager had heard enough. He snapped his fingers, and the two large police officers stepped forward, flanking Arthur like pillars of doom. "Sir," the manager said coldly, "attempting to defraud a hospitality establishment is a serious criminal offense in the United Arab Emirates. Since you clearly have no means of payment for the thousands of dollars you have already consumed, we will be pressing full charges. Officers, please escort Mr. Vance to the station." One of the police officers grabbed Arthur by the arm, twisting it firmly behind his back. The metal handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists with a sharp, heavy sound that echoed all the way to Chicago. "Wait! No! Stop!" Arthur thrashed wildly, his white linen suit tearing at the shoulder as he fought against the officer's grip. Evie, tell them it's a mistake." I watched him struggle on the small screen of my phone. A month ago, seeing my older brother in handcuffs would have broken my heart. I would have sold my house. I would have mortgaged my business. I would have done anything to save him because Dorothy had hardwired my brain to believe that protecting him was my ultimate duty as a sister. But as I watched the tears stream down his sweaty, panicked face, I felt a strange, beautiful hollowness in my chest where my toxic loyalty used to be. I remembered the Christmas card on my desk. Consider this my severance package. I leaned closer to the phone. "I can't tell them it's a mistake, Arthur, because it isn't. You booked the flight. You booked the suite. You tried to spend my daughter's future. You did this to yourself." "Evie, please," he sobbed, snot running down his nose, completely losing any shred of dignity. "I'm begging you, just wire the $50,000. Just pay the hotel so they let me go. I'll pay you back. I swear on Mom's life, I'll pay you back. You know what happens in prisons over here? They'll lock me in a hole." I looked at him and I didn't see my brother anymore. I saw a parasite that had finally been detached from its host. "You can't pay me back, Arthur," I said softly, delivering the final fatal blow, "because you don't have anything, and neither do I. We're completely broke on paper. Enjoy the fireworks." The officers yanked him backward, dragging him toward the hallway. Arthur screamed my name, a high-pitched, terrifying sound of absolute defeat. But as he was being pulled out of the frame, I saw movement in the background of the hotel suite. Jess, who had been frozen in shock near the balcony doors, was suddenly moving. She wasn't running to help Arthur. She wasn't begging the police to let her boyfriend go. She was looking at the heavy gold Rolex that had slipped off Arthur's wrist during the struggle, lying abandoned on the pristine marble floor. And the look of cold, calculating survival on her face told me that my brother's nightmare was only just beginning. I hovered my thumb over the red end call button on my iPhone. Arthur was screaming my name, a guttural, pathetic sound of absolute terror as the 2 Dubai police officers dragged his thrashing body toward the heavy mahogany door of the suite. The illusion was dead. The trap had worked flawlessly. It was time to hang up, hold my daughter tight, and finally get some sleep on the floor of our freezing house. But Chloe, whose eyes were still darting across the FaceTime video feed, reached out and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Wait, Mom," she whispered, pointing at the screen. "Don't cut the feed yet. Look at Jess." I pulled my thumb back and focused on the background of the chaotic hotel room. Jess, the 29-year-old gold digger who had just spent the last 5 minutes flaunting a $20,000 Birkin bag bought with my stolen money, was no longer frozen in shock. The facade of the loving, supportive girlfriend evaporated faster than a drop of water on a hot skillet. She wasn't looking at Arthur with concern. She was looking at him with pure, unadulterated disgust. The realization had visibly washed over her. There was no offshore account. There was no $1.2 million. Arthur wasn't a misunderstood genius entrepreneur. He was a broke, delusional fraud who had just maxed out a corporate card and was currently being hauled off to a Middle Eastern prison. He was no longer an asset. He was dead weight, and a woman like Jess did not drown for someone else's mistake. I watched in morbid fascination as she took a calculated step forward, her designer heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. She didn't move toward the police to intervene. She moved toward the spot where Arthur had stumbled. Lying there, gleaming under the harsh recessed lighting of the luxury suite, was my late husband's gold Rolex Daytona. The heavy clasp had broken when the officer twisted Arthur's arm behind his back. Jess bent down gracefully, her diamond tennis necklace catching the light, and scooped the watch off the floor. Arthur, who was being forced to his knees near the doorway by the officers, twisted his neck to look back at her. His face was slick with sweat and tears. For a split second, a look of desperate hope flashed in his eyes. He thought she was picking it up to keep it safe for him. He thought they were still a team. "Jess!" Arthur choked out, gasping for air as the officer pressed a knee between his shoulder blades to secure the handcuffs. "Jess, call the embassy. Call my mother. Tell these idiots I'm an American citizen. We can fix this." Jess didn't pull out her phone. She didn't look at the police. She simply stood up, wiped a smudge off the face of the solid gold watch with her thumb, and slipped it directly onto her own slender wrist. It hung loosely, sliding down to rest against the handle of her bright orange Hermes bag. Arthur stopped struggling. He stared at her, his brain completely short-circuiting. "Jess, what are you doing? Give that to the manager to hold for collateral. It's worth 30 grand. Jess let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed off the vaulted ceiling of the Royal Atlantis suite. She looked down at the man she had been kissing just 10 minutes ago, her eyes cold and reptilian. "Collateral for what, Arthur?" she sneered, her voice dripping with venom. "For your hotel bill? I'm not paying for your mistakes. You lied to me. You told me you were liquid. You told me we were set for life. Did you really drag me all the way to Dubai just to trick me into a backpacking trip in a jail cell?" "I didn't know," Arthur pleaded, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. "My psycho sister set me up. We're in this together, Jess. You helped by me plan it." Jess's eyes widened in sheer panic at his words. She looked nervously at the hotel manager, who was standing a few feet away with his arms crossed, watching the domestic implosion with utter disdain. Jess was ruthless, but she wasn't stupid. She knew she had to distance herself immediately, or she'd be wearing matching handcuffs. She pivoted her strategy flawlessly, instantly transforming from a vicious gold digger into a terrified, naive victim. She pressed the back of her hand against her forehead, forcing tears to pool in her eyes. "I didn't plan anything with you, you monster," she cried out, her voice trembling with fake trauma. She looked at the hotel manager and the police officers, playing the damsel in distress perfectly. Officers, he lied to me. He told me he was a tech millionaire. I thought this was a romantic getaway. I had no idea he was using a fraudulent credit card. I'm a victim here too. Please, I just want to go home to my family in Florida. The hotel manager sighed, clearly exhausted by the drama of American tourists. Ma'am, we do not care about your relationship. Our concern is the individual who attempted to run the declined card for $50,000. As long as your name is not on that corporate account, you are free to leave. Arthur let out a howl of pure, agonizing betrayal. She's wearing a stolen watch. Arrest her. She's holding a $20,000 bag I bought today. Arrest her, you idiots. But the officers didn't speak English well enough to care about a domestic dispute over jewelry, and the manager was solely focused on the man who had defrauded his hotel. They yanked Arthur to his feet. Jess knew her window to escape was closing. She had the clearance to leave, but she wasn't done scavenging. She needed a safety net. She walked quickly over to the mahogany entryway table where Arthur had dumped his pockets earlier that afternoon. Sitting next to a bowl of complimentary fruit was his leather travel wallet. Arthur's eyes bulged out of his skull as he realized what she was looking at. Jess, don't you dare touch that. Jess ignored him. She flipped the wallet open. Inside was a thick stack of crisp $100 bills, the $5,000 in emergency cash he had brought for tips and taxis. She pulled the stack out and shoved it unceremoniously into her cleavage. Then, she reached back into the wallet and pulled out the small, dark blue booklet, his United States passport. Arthur let out a sound that wasn't even human. It was the desperate, breathless shriek of an animal caught in a bear trap watching a predator approach. Losing the watch was painful. Losing the cash was humiliating. But losing his passport in a strict foreign country where he was currently under arrest was an absolute death sentence. Without that little blue book, he was a ghost. He had no identity. He couldn't prove who he was to the consulate. He couldn't be deported easily. He would be stuck in the bureaucratic nightmare of the Dubai penal system for months, maybe years, before they could even verify his citizenship. "Give it back!" Arthur screamed, thrashing so violently that it took both officers to pin him against the wall. The fabric of his custom white suit ripped down the back. "Jess, please! I can't get home without it. Don't leave me here with no name. I'll do anything. I'll give you everything." Jess walked over to him, stopping just out of kicking range. She looked immaculate, holding the orange bag bought with my stolen credit, wearing my dead husband's watch, and clutching my brother's freedom in her manicured hand. She looked directly into the iPhone camera that was still propped up on the table, making eye contact with me for a split second. She gave a cold, conspiratorial nod, acknowledging the brutal game we were both playing, before turning her back on the screen to look down at Arthur. "Consider this my severance package, Arthur," Jess whispered, throwing his exact words back in his face. "I'm keeping this as an insurance policy. If you ever get out of whatever hellhole they put you in and you try to come after me for the watch or the bag, remember that I hold your identity. Have a nice life, loser." She turned on her heel, her hair flipping over her shoulder. "Goodbye, officers. Thank you for protecting me from this criminal." And with that, Jess walked out the door of the Royal Atlantis suite, the heavy mahogany clicking shut behind her. Arthur watched her go, his mouth open in a silent scream. The utter devastation on his face was biblical. Within the span of 10 minutes, he had been stripped of his stolen wealth, his dignity, his toxic relationship, and finally, his very identity. He was completely alone in the desert, and the vultures had already picked his bones clean. "She took my ID," Arthur wept, his legs giving out as the officers dragged him toward the door. "She robbed me. Why did you let her go? Call my mom, please. Evie, call mom. Tell her to save me." One of the police officers finally noticed the iPhone propped up on the table, broadcasting the entire pathetic scene. He muttered something in Arabic, reached out a massive calloused hand, and grabbed the device. For a split second, I saw the blinding glare of the chandelier, and then the officer's thumb hit the screen. The FaceTime call abruptly ended. My iPhone screen went black. The silence that slammed into our freezing Chicago living room was deafening. The thumping club music, the screaming, the crying. It all vanished instantly, replaced only by the low hiss of the portable propane heater. I sat completely frozen, staring at my own reflection in the dark glass of the phone. My heart was pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I had expected to feel a pang of guilt. I had expected the lifelong conditioning from my mother, the conditioning that told me I was responsible for Arthur's well-being, to kick in and make me weep for my brother. But as I sat there, gripping the heavy wool blanket, I realized the guilt never came. I felt nothing but a cold, hard, shaking relief. The tumor had been excised. I was safe. Chloe was safe. The money was safe. I let out a long, ragged exhale, my shoulders slumping as the adrenaline finally began to drain from my system. I looked over at Chloe. My 10-year-old daughter had set her iPad down. She was hugging her stuffed bear, watching me with an expression that was entirely too old for her face. She didn't look triumphant. She looked exhausted. She was a child who had been forced to play a high-stakes game of cyber warfare to protect her family because the adults in her life had failed her. Seeing her sitting there in her pink pajamas, illuminated by a single candle and a space heater, broke something deep inside me. I crawled across the rug and pulled her into my arms, dragging her onto my lap. I buried my face in the crook of her neck, inhaling the sweet, innocent scent of her. And then the tears finally came. Not a trickle, but a massive, gut-wrenching flood. I sobbed until my chest physically ached, rocking her back and forth in the dim light. I wasn't crying for Arthur. I was crying from the violent relief of a survivor walking away from a plane crash. I had almost lost everything. I had almost lost the company I built, the house we lived in, and the future my husband had bled to secure. And this little girl, this brilliant, quiet, terrifying little girl, had saved us. Chloe didn't pull away. She wrapped her small arms around my neck and patted my back with a rhythmic, soothing motion, letting me weep until the tremors in my hands finally subsided. "It's okay, Mom," she whispered into my hair, her voice calm and steady. "He can't hurt us anymore. The money is locked in the vault. The bad man is gone." I pulled back slightly, wiping my wet cheeks with the palms of my hands. I forced a smile, desperately wanting to be the strong mother again, to reassure her that the nightmare was truly over. "We did it, Chloe," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "It's finally over. Tomorrow, I'll go to the bank with the lawyer, we'll unlock the trust, and we can turn the heat back on. We can go back to normal." Chloe looked at me, her dark eyes searching my face. She reached out and used her thumb to wipe a stray tear from my chin. But she didn't return my smile. Instead, her expression hardened, shifting back into the calculating, analytical stare she wore when she was reading code. "It's not over yet, Mom," she said, her voice dropping to a serious register. I froze, the relief in my chest instantly turning to ice. "What do you mean?" "Arthur is in handcuffs. He has no passport. He's trapped." Chloe shook her head slowly. The methodical logic inherited from her father was running at full speed. "Arthur was just the bullet, Mom. He's dumb and lazy. He never could have pulled off the logistics of this without help. He didn't have the money to hire movers to clear out his apartment. He didn't have the cash to pay for the Uber to O'Hare. Somebody funded his escape before he even tried to run your card." She reached for her iPad, tapping the screen to bring up a frozen frame of the video feed from our security cameras, a feed I had completely forgotten about. "There's still one person left," Chloe said, staring deep into my eyes. "Grandma." My breath hitched in my throat. My mother. Dorothy. The woman who had looked me in the eye while I was crying on her Persian rug and told me I was selfish for wanting my stolen money back. My C/S personality traits, the compliance and steadiness that made me such a meticulous event planner, suddenly kicked into overdrive. My grief vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating anger. Chloe was right. Arthur was the weapon, but Dorothy was the one who aimed it. She had financed his getaway. She had enabled the destruction of my life. And if I didn't deal with her, she would find a way to bail him out and start this whole war over again. I wiped my face, my jaw setting into a hard line. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a CEO, protecting her company, and a mother protecting her child. "You're right," I told my daughter, pulling the wool blanket tightly around my shoulders. "First thing Monday morning, we aren't just going to the bank. We're going to the lawyer. It's time to deal with the architect." By the first week of January 2026, my life had become a masterclass in compartmentalization and systematic execution. I didn't act on impulse. I didn't let the trauma dictate my actions. Instead, I broke the chaos down into manageable, actionable steps. Checklists, timelines, hard data. Step 1. The morning after New Year's Eve, my lawyer, Greg Sterling, met me at the bank. Together with Chloe's biometric thumbprint and Greg's notarized authorization, we unlocked David's trust. Step 2. I systematically routed the funds back to their proper accounts. I paid the utility companies. The furnace roared back to life, flooding my Oak Park home with glorious, expensive heat. I paid my vendors. I called Thomas, the wine distributor, wired him the $45,000, and offered him a 10% bonus for the inconvenience. By January 5th, Hayes Elegance wasn't just surviving. It was structurally sound again. But I knew the silence from my mother's end wasn't a surrender. It was the calm before a hurricane. Dorothy Vance was a woman who thrived on control, and her golden child was currently sitting in a concrete detention center in the Middle East. I knew she wouldn't just sit in her pristine Evanston living room and knit. I was right. On a gray, sleet-filled Tuesday afternoon, a process server knocked on my front door and handed me a thick manila envelope. It was a civil lawsuit. Dorothy was suing me for intentional infliction of emotional distress and financial abuse of a family member. And she was petitioning a Cook County judge for an emergency injunction to freeze my assets and legally compel me to release funds to pay for Arthur's international legal fees, restitution to the Dubai hotel, and a first-class flight home. In her delusional, twisted mind, I was the villain who had maliciously set a trap for her innocent boy. She actually believed a judge would force me to bail out my own thief. I read the summons standing in my foyer, holding the thick stack of legal threats. I didn't cry. I didn't throw a glass against the wall. I simply picked up my phone, called Greg, and scheduled a meeting. Tell my mother, I instructed my lawyer, my voice completely flat, that if she wants to discuss a financial settlement, she needs to be at your downtown office on Thursday at 10 a.m. sharp. No attorneys on her end yet. Just an informal mediation to see if we can settle this quietly. Dorothy took the bait. She thought I was folding. She thought the threat of a public scandal had broken my resolve, just like it always did when I was a teenager. Thursday morning arrived with a bitter, biting wind coming off Lake Michigan. Greg's office was on the 42nd floor of a sleek high-rise in the Loop. The conference room was all polished mahogany and floor-to-ceiling glass, projecting an aura of absolute authority. I sat at the head of the table wearing a sharp, tailored navy suit. I had a single manila folder in front of me, perfectly aligned with the edge of the wood. Greg sat to my right, typing quietly on his laptop. At exactly 10:04 a.m., the heavy glass doors swung open. Dorothy stormed in. She looked entirely unraveled. Her usually immaculate silver hair was slightly frizzy from the wind. The designer cashmere coat she wore looked heavy on her suddenly frail shoulders. But her eyes were wild, rimmed with the red irritation of sleeplessness and narcissistic rage. She didn't say hello to Greg. She didn't even take her coat off. She marched straight up to the table, slammed her designer handbag down, and pointed a shaking, manicured finger directly at my face. "The consulate called me at 3 a.m, Evelyn," she shrieked, her voice echoing off the glass walls. 3 a.m. They said your brother is being held in a holding cell with 20 other men. They said he has no passport. That little tramp just stole his watch and his ID, and he is terrified. I kept my hands folded neatly on the table. I didn't break eye contact. He chose his travel companion mom, and he chose to try and spend $50,000 he didn't have. He borrowed it! Dorothy slammed her hands on the mahogany table, leaning over it like a vulture. He was going to pay you back once his real estate investment paid off, but you had to be right. You had to play your little computer games. Well, congratulations. You won. Your brother is eating gruel in a country where he doesn't speak the language. Are you happy now? Are you satisfied with your cruelty? Mrs. Vance, Greg intervened smoothly, his voice a calm legal baritone. I advise you to lower your voice. We are here to discuss the frivolous lawsuit you filed against my client. It is not frivolous, Dorothy snapped, whipping her head toward him. She set a trap. She lured him into it. I want a check cut today. I want $500,000 wired to the embassy to cover his fines, his legal representation, and a new passport expedited. If you don't do it, Evelyn, I swear to God, I will call every client you have and tell them you are a sociopath. I will ruin your business. I will make sure you are an outcast in this city. She stood there, vibrating with fury, waiting for me to shrink. She was waiting for the compliant, steady daughter to apologize, to smooth things over, to write the check just to keep the peace. That was the dynamic we had operated on for 34 years. I slowly opened the manila folder in front of me. Inside was a sleek silver tablet. You want to talk about cruelty, Mom? I asked, my voice dropping to a register so cold and clinical it actually made her blink. Let's talk about facts. Let's talk about timelines. I slid the tablet across the polished wood until it stopped right in front of her. Do you remember last spring when there was that string of burglaries in your neighborhood? I asked calmly. You were terrified. You begged me to install a smart security system. You wanted cameras on the porch, the driveway, and the living room, just in case someone broke in through the patio doors. Dorothy's brow furrowed. The sheer momentum of her anger hit a speed bump. What does that have to do with anything? You forgot that I set up the cloud storage account on my company server, I said, and you forgot that those cameras record high-definition audio. I tapped the screen. The video filled the tablet. The image was crisp, showing the sun-drenched living room of Dorothy's Evanston home. The timestamp in the corner read December 20th, 2025, 2:15 p.m. The exact afternoon, Arthur broke into my safe. On the screen, Dorothy was standing by her antique secretary desk. She wasn't knitting, she wasn't sipping tea. She was holding a thick, white envelope. Arthur was pacing nervously on the Persian rug in front of her. I turned the volume up. Dorothy's own voice filled the conference room, loud, undeniable, and utterly damning. Here is $10,000 in cash, the digital Dorothy said on the recording, shoving the envelope into Arthur's chest. And here is your old passport. I found it in your college trunk in the attic. You and Jess need to leave tonight. On screen, Arthur looked hesitant. But what about Evie? She's going to freak out when she sees the accounts are empty. She'll call the cops. They can track the wire. Damn. The Dorothy on the screen let out a cold, dismissive laugh that made my blood run cold all over again. Let her freak out. She has plenty of money tucked away, Arthur. She can afford to lose a little. She always bounces back. You just get to O'Hare. Go quickly and forget about your sister. I'll handle her. I hit the pause button. The image froze perfectly on the scene of betrayal. The mother, the golden sun, and the envelope of cash that sealed their pact. The silence in the conference room was absolute. It was so quiet I could hear the wind howling against the thick glass windows of the skyscraper. Dorothy stared at the tablet, her mouth slightly agape. All the color drained from her face, leaving her looking sallow and ancient. The haughty, arrogant matriarch vanished, replaced instantly by the terrified realization of a woman who had just watched herself commit a federal crime in 4K resolution. There was no way to spin this. There was no gaslighting her way out of it. She wasn't just a passive observer who gave her son bad advice. She was the architect. She was the bankroll. That is what the Department of Justice calls aiding and abetting a fugitive, I said, leaning back in my leather chair, perfectly composed. That video proves premeditation. It proves you financed his escape. It proves you actively conspired to defraud me and your own granddaughter. Dorothy swallowed hard. Her throat clicked audibly in the quiet room. She looked from the tablet to Greg, then finally to me. Her eyes darted around like a trapped bird seeking an open window. But there were no windows. There were only walls of hard, undeniable evidence. You recorded me in my own home, she stammered, her voice stripped of all its power. That's illegal. You asked me to install it, Mrs. Vance, Greg chimed in, perfectly on cue. And since Evelyn pays the monthly subscription fee for the cloud storage, she is the legal administrator of the account. The footage is entirely admissible in a federal court. I stood up, buttoning the jacket of my suit. I walked around the massive mahogany table until I was standing right next to the woman who had abused my loyalty my entire life. She shrank back in her chair, physically intimidated by the sheer, unbending structure of my resolve. This isn't a negotiation, Mom, I said, looking down at her. This is a hostage situation, and you are the hostage. That video is a digital gun to your head. I picked up a legal document from Greg's side of the table and dropped it right on top of the tablet. So here is how this plays out, I stated, ticking the points off my fingers systematically. Option A. I emailed this video clip to the FBI field office in Chicago right now. They are already building a wire fraud case against Arthur, and they would be absolutely thrilled to add a co-conspirator to the indictment. You will be arrested. You will be handcuffed in your cashmere coat. You will lose your house to pay for your defense, and your mugshot will be the lead story on the 6 o'clock news. Think about what your friends at the country club will say when they see you in an orange jumpsuit. Dorothy flinched as if I had struck her. The threat to her social standing was 1,000 times more potent than any threat to her morality. Or, I continued, my voice steady as a metronome, option B. You sign that document right there. It is a binding withdrawal of your frivolous lawsuit with prejudice. Included in it is an absolute cease and desist order. You will never contact me again. You will never come near Chloe again. You will not call, you will not write, and you will not ask me about Arthur. You will let him rot in that Dubai cell, and you will live the rest of your life with the quiet, agonizing knowledge that you put him there. I leaned in, my face inches from hers. If you choose option B, I keep this video in a secure vault. You stay free, but you stay away from us forever. I watched the calculus play out behind her eyes. I watched her weigh her obsessive, toxic love for her son against her love for her own comfort, reputation, and freedom. It took less than 15 seconds. Self-preservation won, just as I mathematically knew it would. The fire in her eyes completely died out, leaving them dull, watery, and defeated. The invisible strings that held up her arrogance were severed with surgical precision. With a trembling hand, Dorothy reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a gold Mont Blanc pen. She didn't read the document. She just flipped to the last page and signed her name on the dotted line. The ink scratched loudly against the paper. She stood up slowly. She looked older than she had 10 minutes ago. She smoothed the front of her coat, trying to regain a shred of dignity where absolutely none remained. She opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to offer a parting curse or a final pathetic plea. But she looked at my face, saw the impenetrable wall of my resolve, and thought better of it. Without a single word, Dorothy Vance turned her back on her daughter. She walked out of the conference room, her steps heavy and uneven, and disappeared down the hallway. The heavy glass door swung shut, sealing with a soft final click. I stood in the quiet office, looking at the signed surrender document on the table. The toxic umbilical cord had finally, permanently been cut. The surgical extraction was a complete success. "Well handled, Evelyn," Greg said quietly, closing his laptop. "Thank you, Greg," I replied. I picked up the document, slid it into my manila folder, and walked out to the elevator. The war was over. I had protected my business, I had protected my daughter, and I had neutralized the threats using nothing but facts, logic, and a heavy dose of reality. But karma, as it turns out, is a meticulous accountant, and she wasn't quite finished collecting her debts. There is a profound, almost terrifying clarity that comes after you surgically remove the toxic elements from your life. By the second week of January 2026, the air in my Oak Park home didn't just feel warm, it felt clean. I had successfully defended my business, secured my daughter's future, and legally neutralized my mother. But I wasn't the one who had to deliver the final blows to the people who had tried to ruin me. Karma, as it turns out, is a meticulous accountant, and she was about to collect her final debts with brutal, merciless efficiency. The first invoice came due for Jess. In mid-January, Jess strutted through the automatic doors of Customs and Border Protection at Chicago O'Hare International Airport with the unearned swagger of a woman who thought she had just pulled off the heist of the century. She was wearing her oversized designer sunglasses inside Terminal 5, carrying the bright orange Hermes Birkin bag, and on her slender left wrist hung the heavy, solid gold Rolex Daytona she had ripped off my brother's arm in Dubai. She felt completely invincible. She had ditched the dead weight in the desert and returned to the land of opportunity with a bag full of stolen cash and a watch she planned to pawn for 30 grand. She breezed past the exhausted families struggling with luggage carts and headed straight for the green channel marked "Nothing to Declare." She was so busy calculating her pawn shop payout that she didn't notice the CBP officer stepping directly into her path until it was too late. He was a large, no-nonsense guy with a flat expression that signaled zero tolerance for amateur hour. He looked at her, then at the bright orange bag, and finally locked his eyes onto the gold watch dangling loosely on her wrist. "Ma'am, I need you to step aside for a secondary inspection," the officer said, his voice leaving absolutely no room for argument. Jess rolled her eyes, letting out a loud, theatrical sigh. "Excuse me, I'm an American citizen. I just got off a 14-hour flight. I have nothing to hide." The officer didn't blink. He simply pointed a thick finger toward a set of heavy double doors. "Step this way, please." Inside the sterile, windowless inspection room, the atmosphere instantly shifted from annoyance to sheer intimidation. Two officers stood by a cold metal table. They instructed her to empty her pockets and place all her bags on the surface. Jess moved slowly, trying to maintain her snooty composure. She placed the Birkin bag down, then Arthur's wallet, then the thick stack of $100 bills. She subtly tried to keep her left hand hidden behind her back, but the officer caught the movement. "The watch too, ma'am," he commanded. Jess hesitated, a flicker of panic finally cracking her facade. "It was a gift," she lied smoothly, her voice pitching up an octave. My ex-boyfriend gave it to me in Dubai. It's a fake, honestly, a total knockoff. It's not worth anything. The officer picked up the heavy timepiece. He turned it over, examining the flawless craftsmanship and the sweeping second hand. This is not a replica, ma'am. This is solid gold, and you failed to declare it on your customs form. That's a federal offense right there. He walked over to his computer terminal and typed in the serial number engraved on the back of the case. A moment later, a bright red alert box popped up on his screen. The officer looked up at Jess with a new, razor-sharp intensity. He didn't look like a customs agent anymore. He looked like a hunter who had just cornered a fox. This watch was reported stolen by an Evelyn Hayes in Chicago 3 weeks ago, he said flatly. But honestly, that is the absolute least of your problems today. He swiped her passport through the scanner and pressed her index finger against the biometric reader. The system processed her prints, loading for a microsecond before emitting a loud, jarring beep. The officer stood up and signaled to his partner, who immediately moved to block the only exit door. "Jessica Miller," the officer read from the screen, his tone dripping with disdain. "We have an outstanding federal warrant for your arrest out of Miami from 3 years ago. Trafficking in counterfeit luxury goods and interstate smuggling. You skipped bail, Jess. You've been on the watch list for a long time. We just needed you to scan your prints at an international port of entry to confirm it." Jess's knees literally gave out. She grabbed the edge of the metal table to keep from collapsing to the floor. The arrogant confidence that had carried her through Dubai evaporated into thin air. She wasn't just a gold digger with a stolen watch. She was a federal fugitive who had walked right back into the lion's den. "I didn't know," she stammered, real tears finally streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "That was a mistake. I was young. Please, let me call my lawyer." "You can call your lawyer from the detention center," the officer said, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for grand larceny, failure to declare assets, and the outstanding smuggling warrant." Jess felt the cold steel lock tightly around her wrists. She looked at the orange Birkin bag on the table, the ultimate symbol of her greed, and realized she would never carry it again. She thought she was the player, but she was just another pawn that had been swept off the board. She was led out of the room in shackles, heading straight for a holding cell that would become her home for a very long, very bleak time. 2 weeks later, at the end of January, the second invoice was delivered. 30 days in a Dubai detention center doesn't just change a man, it hollows him out. Arthur spent a month in a concrete box, stripped of his custom linen suits, eating flavorless meals that barely kept him functional. The arrogance that had defined his entire 36 years of life was sweated out of him, drop by painful drop, until all that remained was a terrified, broken shell of a man. When the deportation order finally came through, Arthur actually wept. He thought it was a mercy. He convinced himself that because the wire transfer had been a fake simulation, because he hadn't actually succeeded in moving the $1.2 million, nobody in America would care. He fantasized that he could just land in Chicago, take a bus to our mother's house in Evanston, and sleep in his childhood bedroom while she cooked him dinner and told him everything was going to be all right. He was dead wrong. Arthur's commercial flight taxied to the gate at O'Hare under a gray, miserable sky. He stood up, his legs weak, and shuffled down the aisle in the rumpled clothes he had been arrested in. He stepped onto the jet bridge and inhaled the freezing, damp air of Illinois. It tasted like freedom. But the jet bridge didn't lead to baggage claim. It led to a physical wall of federal agents. 6 men in dark suits and windbreakers emblazoned with the letters FBI were waiting for him right at the gate door. They didn't look sympathetic to his weight loss or his ordeal. "Arthur Vance," the lead agent said, stepping forward to block his path. "You are under arrest." Arthur recoiled, his back hitting the corrugated wall of the tunnel. "For what?" he croaked, his voice raspy. "I didn't steal the money. The transaction failed. It was a fake website. I already served my time over there." The agent pulled out a pair of handcuffs, flipping Arthur around and shoving his face against the wall. "Attempted wire fraud is still wire fraud, Mr. Vance. You're being indicted for identity theft, computer intrusion, and bank fraud. You used stolen credentials to attempt to move over $1 million across international lines. The Federal Reserve has a very, very long memory." The metal clicked around his wrists. Arthur collapsed, his legs giving way entirely. He didn't fight. He just slid down the wall until he hit the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. "Call my mother!" Arthur wailed, sounding exactly like a lost toddler. "Call Dorothy Vance! She'll get my lawyer! She'll post my bail!" The lead agent looked down at him with a mixture of pity and utter disgust. Your mother isn't coming, Arthur. In fact, her sworn affidavit confirming that you stole the security key and fled the country on your own accord is the foundational piece of evidence in our indictment. To avoid conspiracy charges herself, your mother gave you up. Arthur stopped crying. The words hung in the freezing air of the jet bridge, shattering the very last pillar of his reality. Dorothy hadn't saved him. Faced with the threat of her own arrest and public humiliation, my mother had thrown her golden child directly under the bus. She had signed my cease and desist, withdrawn her lawsuit, and handed Arthur over to the feds on a silver platter just to keep her country club membership and her pristine Evanston home. The toxic family dynamic had finally consumed itself. They had eaten each other alive. Arthur's trial was a mere formality. The digital footprint Chloe had preserved, combined with Dorothy's desperate, self-serving testimony, was an ironclad absolute. The judge looked at the broken man in the orange jumpsuit and saw zero reason for leniency. 15 years in a federal penitentiary. The golden boy was finally, permanently tarnished. And Dorothy? She got exactly what she bargained for, her freedom. But it was a prison of its own making. She kept her big, empty house in the suburbs. But the rumors of what she had done, selling out her own son to save her skin, abandoning her daughter and granddaughter, spread through her elite social circles like a virus. The phone stopped ringing. The invitations to charity luncheons dried up. She was completely isolated, left to wander the immaculate, silent halls of her home, knowing that she had sacrificed everything that mattered for the illusion of control. The ultimate punishment for a narcissist is irrelevance, and Dorothy Vance had become entirely, painfully invisible. By the time Valentine's Day rolled around in February 2026, the storm had completely passed. It was a Saturday morning. A fresh layer of pristine white snow blanketed the front lawn of our Oak Park home. The house was blissfully warm. The fireplace was crackling, casting a soft golden glow across the living room. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, holding a steaming mug of dark roast coffee, wearing thick wool socks and my most comfortable sweatpants. My business checking account was robust. My team was booked solid for the spring wedding season. The heavy, suffocating anxiety that I had carried on my shoulders for 34 years was completely gone. Chloe was sitting cross-legged on the rug near the fire, her iPad resting on her knees. She wasn't writing security code or tracking international fugitives today. She was playing a silly farming simulator game, her brow furrowed in concentration as she tried to harvest virtual carrots. She looked rested. She looked happy. She looked like a 10-year-old girl again. I took a sip of my coffee and watched her, a profound sense of peace washing over me. For my entire life, I had been force-fed the lie that blood is thicker than water. I had been taught that family is an unconditional obligation, a permanent past that allows people to abuse you, drain you, and disrespect you simply because you share the same DNA. I learned the hard way that toxic people will gladly drown you to save themselves, and they will call it family duty while they hold your head underwater. But looking at my daughter, I finally understood the truth. Family is not a biological default. Family is a title that must be earned through mutual respect, protection, and unwavering loyalty. Family are the people who stand in the breach with you when the walls are falling down. Family are the people who build firewalls to protect you while you sleep. Arthur and Dorothy were my history. But Chloe was my family. Chloe was my future. She looked up from her iPad, catching me staring at her. She offered me a bright, easy smile. "What?" she asked, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Nothing," I smiled back, reaching out to ruffle her hair. "Just thinking about how lucky I am to have you on my team." She bumped her shoulder affectionately against my knee. "Always, Mom. We're the best team. We were a small army, just the two of us. But standing on the other side of the fire, I knew one thing for certain. We were absolutely invincible. If you are listening to this and you are holding on to a relationship that hurts you, whether it's a sibling, a parent, or a partner, just because you share a history or a last name, take this story as your sign. You do not owe anyone your sanity, your savings, or your peace of mind. Never let blood bind you to those who bleed you dry. Cut the cord, build your firewall, and go live your beautiful life. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end. If you believe that boundaries are the highest form of self-love, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. I'll see you all in the next story. Stay safe and stay strong.